This show features real crime scene photos and actual participants. Illustrational stock footage is also used for narrational purposes. This video contains sensitive content and may not be suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised. Every once in a while, you come across a case where you genuinely wonder, is it safe to leave my family with a stranger? For many, this isn't a choice they get to make. People leave their precious children, elderly parents, or other loved ones with caretakers because of work schedules and other constraints. No matter how many background checks and references you have, there's always that small doubt in your head, the little gray spot on mutual trust and understanding. A child is irreplaceable and possibly essential in a parent's life. Sweet little Hannah Wesche was Jason Wesche's everything. From the moment he saw his baby girl, he fell hard. He got his life together and did everything he could to ensure his little girl got the life she deserved. His love and care in the absence of Hannah's mother were immense. It was evident from Hannah's sweet demeanor and confidence. But everything would go dark on a regular day on March 8th when his sweet little girl would be silenced forever. Hannah Wesche was born to Jason Wesche and Adrienne Latham on January 11, 2015. Adrienne Latham struggled with a severe drug addiction, resulting in the baby being born addicted to drugs. She was extremely fragile, and doctors gave her a week to live. Jason Wesche saw his daughter for the first time in an incubator. She touched his heart, and he vowed to turn things around. Always a fighter, Hannah made it well past her first week and grew up to be a beautiful little girl. Jason Wesche always had custody of Hannah, but he couldn't afford much. Already a father to 2 children, Jason lost his job when Hannah was just 4 months old. He left his daughter to sleep at his brother's house comfortably while he slept in his car for 2 long years. He did everything he could to provide for his little girls. Jason finally landed a good job in construction at Hanover Township and worked 12 hours a day to turn things around. Later, he switched to Smith Corp Construction in Butler County, where he worked as a mechanic. There, he met his supervisor T.J. Smith, who offered help to the single father, offering his wife to babysit Hannah while Jason went to work. Jason had taken care of Hannah alone, so this was a welcome break for him. TJ assumed that since Lindsay was watching her daughters and babysitting for a friend, she wouldn't mind taking on little Hannah. 35-year-old Lindsay Partin agreed to watch Hannah temporarily. About a month later, Jason moved into the house next door, and life was finally working out smoothly. He had a steady job, a reliable babysitter, and a lovely home for his family. He was finally living with his daughter instead of sleeping in his car. They established a comfortable routine. Lindsay would babysit Hannah all days except Fridays. Hannah would get dropped off around 6 a.m., and Lindsay would feed her, take her to dance classes on Mondays, bathe her, and even wash her clothes. Lindsay was almost a mother to the little girl. Life was good, and life was perfect. Jason would notice Hannah came home with bruises, assuming she played rough at the Smiths' home. What Jason didn't realize was Lindsay's mental health was deteriorating. Lindsay suffered from a miscarriage at the end of February and lost a baby. She would often get frustrated and always said yes to everything anyone asked. Everything erupted on March 8, 2018, 2 weeks after Lindsay's miscarriage. She made a frantic 911 call as 3-year-old Hannah struggled in the background.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. What's going on?
Okay, my name is Lindsay. I babysit kids.
Yes.
And we just dropped her off, and all of a sudden she just passed out.
Who's passed out?
The little girl, she's 3. She felt pretty bad yesterday, and she was fine. And then all of a sudden we dropped her off this morning, and she walked in and she kind of passed out, and she went limp.
That morning, Jason noticed Hannah didn't want to sit in his lap as he drove her over to Lindsay. Instead, she crouched in the back seat. He assumed she was playing. Minutes after he dropped her off, he was already at the barn where he worked when Lindsay called to tell him his little girl wasn't breathing. Jason rushed to his daughter's side and moved her from the floor to the couch in the garage, helping her the best he could. As he said her name, she would gasp and take in some air, then let it out and not breathe for a split second. Lindsay asked if she should call 911, which seemed odd for someone experiencing a medical emergency. She should have already called emergency services by now. Officers brought in Lindsay, T.J. Smith, and Jason for questioning. In the interrogation room, everyone was a suspect, but Lindsay seemed the most suspicious of all. Her body language was off. There were many deceptive tells, such as repeatedly holding her hands palm up and using statements like I swear. She used this term at least 4 times. The officers were trained to recognize these as lies of a possible felon, so the officer put cold hard facts in front of her. Hannah might die, and this would not be an abuse case but an active homicide. Lindsay seemed visibly shaken, so the officers asked her to repeat what she had done and said. She didn't say it outright, but she pointed the officers in Jason's direction, claiming he got into a fight at the factory and admitted to having a temper. The officers countered her statements saying Hannah returned to him with bruises. She emphasized that Hannah came to her with bruises, and she specially told them that she looked up how to make a bruise look better so that she could help Hannah. It is noticeable that Lindsay was trying to throw officers off her case, explaining her Google search, which she knew would come under scrutiny. She was playing it smart. In doing so, she gave away something vital. She wanted to make the bruise look better instead of making Hannah feel better. Officers knew they had the right person, so they played classic good cop, bad cop. Lindsay was left alone with the female officer so she could ease up and eventually lead to some truth in this situation, possibly confessing to her acts. In another room, TJ confirmed her story, talking about Jason almost getting fired 2 days before the incident, which could mean Jason was under a tremendous amount of stress. When questioning Jason, the officers noticed all his words came straight out, and he didn't pretend to know all the answers. He explained how Hannah had complained about hurting her head, and he still assured the officers Lindsay was a good caregiver. Hannah had once told him Lindsay hit her, but he brushed it off when Hannah changed her story, saying she hurt herself in the crib. It's highly possible the 3-year-old was fed the story. Her grandfather, David Wesche, reported that when he questioned Hannah about a bruise, she explained her babysitter had harmed her. On March 9th, officers brought in the babysitter to question her again, but she tried to elude coming down to the station, saying nobody would watch her children. The officers insisted, and this time around, they baited Lindsay by showing her pictures and asking her to explain every bruise and scratch. Even parents can't explain bruises sometimes, and they knew she would give false statements or contradict herself somewhere. It was the perfect strategy. Lindsay went on to explain every single bruise, physically showing them how everything happened and creating inconsistencies that would later let officers get her. One of her statements said Hannah fell by herself. Once confronted with medical evidence that contradicted her story, Lindsay finally gave up and started taking some of the blame, claiming she slipped and fell.
I mean, the fall, I don't want to say convenient, but now that you're being honest with us, now that you're telling us everything, and we know, we kind of have an idea of your mindset.
The fall didn't happen,
You've
because I
been
hurt
through
myself
some.
too. I bruised myself right here trying to catch myself.
This was the third change in her story, and it was strange because Lindsay, a mother of 2 daughters, did not show remorse. If it were an accident, she would have been devastated and perhaps struck with guilt, and there would be no need to lie about it. Cornered, she started confessing to the lighter injuries, hoping her honesty would make the officers believe the more significant deception at work here. She talks about it casually and explains how little Hannah poured ketchup in the toilet, and so Lindsay smacked her. She went on to explain about punching her and grabbing her, as the officers made her feel comfortable.
That pissed you off?
Yes, and I don't know why I hurt her. I don't know why I even slapped her or was even mad. I know why I was.
She finally confessed that she had struck Hannah and had been frustrated due to her miscarriage, which was the second one she experienced. Lindsay kept lying and changing her story, but the detectives were looking for the cranial injury and precisely what she did to cause so much bleeding in a 3-year-old's brain. The problem with the part about a fall was she had used this lie before. In December 2017, she called Jason at work to tell him she had fallen with Hannah and that she needed medical attention. After cross-examination, it turned out there was no doctor visit. Sadly, little Hannah died from her injuries after 10 days in the hospital.
You just pulled the plug on this child. This child is dead.
Oh my God.
When Lindsay's charges were upgraded to homicide, she immediately pleaded not guilty. This person did not understand the gravity of her words or the consequences of her actions and needed a reality check. On trial, Lindsay claimed she was trying to protect her loved ones, so she lied to the officers and fraudulently admitted to hurting Hannah. The trial lasted 8 days, and Lindsay claimed she had nothing to do with hurting the toddler and vehemently denied harming little Hannah. Instead, she tried to blame the detectives and claimed she thought Jason would take the fall.
We can get you immediately off the radar screen if you're willing to take a polygraph and go on. We can our focus everywhere else. Are you willing to do that?
Why would you want me to do that? That's weird.
Because I'm not a lie detector. I'm only taking you at just your word.
I'm all nervous.
It takes all that into consideration. If you had to take one, are you gonna pass it or fail it?
I don't know.
She refused a polygraph test, whereas Jason took one and passed. Law enforcers also uncovered text messages where an angry Lindsay was worried about Jason moving next door and dumping his daughter on her. She was also furious that Jason was always a couple $100 behind in payment. Lindsay Partin was found guilty of 4 counts of child endangerment, 1 count of involuntary manslaughter, and the murder of a 3-year-old Hannah Wesche. She was sentenced to life in prison and wouldn't be eligible for parole for at least 18 years. Her husband refused to testify for her in court. Interestingly, he would later get arrested for sex charges with a minor under 10 and had to be bailed out for $250,000. Who should be blamed here? The people who didn't recognize a woman's mental health was at stake. The father who fell behind on payments. The husband who entrusted his wife with more than she could handle. The only sure thing is Hannah was a tragedy that should never have happened. It's a word of caution to people. Look for signs of abuse and report them. Always be vigilant, especially about caregivers, because the sweetest smiles hide the most sinister intentions.